Joe, let me jump in here because John had written in one of our blogs that in 2012, the Chinese government passed a regulation requiring essentially the takeover of all of the accounting firm senior positions, the partnership positions, by Chinese citizens. And what that means is that has been and remains a complicated issue, because there are a number of these firms, their primary headquarters in China was in Hong Kong. And Hong Kong had a long time, reputation or place where free markets were encouraged, and they have a great English tradition, which is where all the big accounting firms originated, just about all of them. So you have this issue of, for example, some years ago I worked at PricewaterhouseCoopers in Sydney, Australia, but we had clients in Hong Kong, and I had several IPOs that I was the auditor in charge of overseeing those IPOs for Hong Kong companies. All of those Hong Kong audit firms were basically primarily by English, Australian, some other countries' partners, and they were there to uphold the overall reputation and standards for those accounting firms. And that's the way it worked. Well, in 2012, now you have something completely different. You have the firms are supposed to replace those partners with Chinese citizens, and you can rest assured that those Chinese citizens were either Communist Party members or Communist Party people who were affiliated in some way, shape, or form. Because the whole idea of allowing, access to, if you're a Chinese company and you want to make sure that the information being generated by these companies doesn't get into the hands of potentially foreign or US CIA or whoever it is, then you have to take it over. You have to take it over and restrict access. So this has been a long time coming. And the latest activities in Hong Kong dramatically kind of escalate this issue. And I would not be at all surprised if the big firms are almost completely without any authority at this point to oversee their own affiliates in China. And you see a lot of these, like you see the US, you see the UK starting to restrict trade rules and special trade status for Hong Kong, and that will also impact the audit business in a significant way. So we have a lot of things going on right now, and none of them are really good for US investors.
Well, I think one point related to that, I think it's why would an American investor invest in one of these companies if they knew that that there was no real oversight and there was against the law to divulge these correct financial information? So high risk for fraud. But I think there's a real possibility that a lot of these American investors are trusting the reputation of the Big Four, or trusting the reputation of the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ, or trusting the SEC that's allowing these things to be listed in the US. They're trusting a lot of regulatory oversight to make up for these Chinese policies. And I think if you read the statements from the SEC, that trust is misplaced. So they're putting their reputations at risk.
There's something called the assurance supply chain in the world of basically ensuring the integrity of the information being provided. And that supply chain includes a whole host of enterprises and regulators. And what's essentially happened with this particular assurance supply chain is that that in this circumstance, in Luckin's circumstance, for example, the Ernst & Young International has been forced to rely on EY Yao Ming, their affiliate in China, for reliable information. That's where the rubber hits the road. There is no other connection between the assurance supply chain guaranteeing or supporting the disclosure of accurate information. So that's where ultimately that's where, in some respects, Ernst & Young International has been put in that circumstance by the regulators around the globe and by the political figures, because nobody else wants to deal with it. And so in some ways, Ernst & Young, I think, and the other big four firms have, I think they're kind of facing a dilemma now, which is accelerating given the change in power structure in Hong Kong. That they're really put between a rock and a hard place, and it has to be dealt with. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. I feel like something's going to break. There's some sort of big break coming, and it'll be interesting to see whether that comes from the audit firms, whether that comes from the regulatory bodies, or whomever.
I would just add, I mean, I think if we step back about up to the 50,000 foot level, our job in corporate watchdog research, is to watch out for the watchdogs that should be watching out for the investors. And in this particular case, there are two watchdogs we keep mentioning: the SEC, Securities Exchange Commission, the PCAOB, which is the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board. And what effectively has happened here is both of those two organizations have been cut off from their role of regulator and oversight, and yet the American investor doesn't know that generally. If they dug into it, they would know that. And what we see consistently in all the frauds that we find is that there's this sense that surely somebody else is looking at this. And so I don't have to do the work as the investor or as the portfolio manager or as the buyer or sell side analyst because somebody else is doing it. And Joe pointed it out. Mark was talking about how the structure in China is set up so that the oversight of the SEC and PCAOB gets cut off, but apparently very, very few people know that. And what we're doing in Watchdog Research, what we're doing with this video, is exposing that. And we've actually included, and John, if you could show one of our Watchdog Research and for Luckin, you'll actually see a flag that's called the SEC Oversight. And where we identify that there is not proper SEC oversight, we give a red flag. And if John, you scroll down to that section, it actually explains that. If a foreign company is located in China, they don't have this oversight. And this is a red flag that every one of our investors should immediately be looking at. And that's part of what we do. That's part of how we do. These guys have already started delving into the very depth of this problem and even the solution. And I'm sure we're going to return after this. But what I want to make sure is that this is what we deliver. This is our job. Everybody seems to be pointing at everybody else thinking they did the work. The SEC's doing the work. The NASDAQ's doing the work. The PCAOB's doing the work. The auditors are doing the work. And in some cases, those people are not only have their hands tied behind their back, but they have a gag in their mouth and cannot tell people that they can't do the work. And so that's one of the points that I just wanted to make here to make sure everybody's got a sense of why we're talking about this, why we put this on our report. And actually, Joe is working on mathematically, how does this actually translate into stock price declines or stock price weakness? So we could put this into our gray swan event factor in the next few months. So